Bolt thrower. Artillery in musical form. So today we'll be looking at the classic closing track, When Cannons Fade. Don't worry, I will be back to death shortly, but I wanted to take a turn looking at some other fantastic bands here first. When Cannons Fade is from Bolt Thrower's 2005 release, Those Once Loyal. In the first few lines of the song, vocalist Carl Willits references the 8th Offensive. The 8th Offensive is otherwise known as the Battle of Amiens, which was part of a much larger and final offensive of the First World War, the 100 Days Offensive. This final offensive took place from the 8th of August, 1918 to November 11th, 1918. This last offensive would finally break the back of the German army, but it would come at unimaginable human cost. Over 1 million casualties on each side, with over 2.1 million casualties in total. 21,000 a day, 875 an hour, 15 per second. 15 individual lives changed forever every second. 15 families changed forever per second. 15 sons, fathers, cousins, friends, officers, draftees, volunteers, carpenters, miners, painters, etc., etc. All were taken prisoner, wounded, or killed every 15 seconds for 100 days. Until the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, when it all stopped suddenly, the final argument of kings.
On August the 8th, the big push began.
Oh, that was a battle, that was. Early in the morning till late at night. And we was up against the German guards. They was the best soldiers they had.
This is what the song is about and what it represents musically. However, the song has a double meaning to it. Those Once Loyal was the 8th and final Bolt Thrower release too. The song starts out as the opening artillery barrage commences. The lone guitar gives away to the tremendous storm of steel, which is Bolt Thrower's specialty. To me, Bolt Thrower has always sounded like an artillery barrage. If you aren't weird like me, spending your time listening to World War I trench ambiance, then here's a taste as to what drumfire artillery sounded like. Does that sound somewhat familiar? Does it ring somewhat true? The punishing low frequencies punctuated by the pulsating snare beat, the constant rumble of the double kick drums, Joe Bench's absolutely rumbling and thunderous bass. Bolt Thrower plays this at the perfect tempo to represent this, is just punishing, unrelenting. The guitar riff being played is like an NCO trying to yell orders to his men under the intense shell fire and all the sounds of war, gunfire, and everything like that. But you can only hear every other word he says. The offensive has begun, and all hell has broken loose. Ernst Junger, from his incredible book Stahlgewittern, or in English, Storm of Steel, who would end up being injured in one of the battles during the 100 Days Offensive, describes the feeling of being caught in the open during an artillery barrage as such. It is an easier matter to describe these sounds than to endure them, because one cannot but associate every sound of flying steel with the idea of death. And in so, I huddled in my hole in the ground with my hand in front of my face, imagining all the possible variants of being hit. I think I have found a comparison which compares the situation in which I and all other soldiers who took part in this war often found themselves. You must imagine you are securely tied to a post, being menaced by a man who's swinging a heavy hammer. Now the hammer has been taken back over his head, ready to be swung. Now it's cleaving the air towards you, on the point of touching your skull. Then it's struck the post and splinters are flying. That's what it's like to experience heavy shelling in an exposed position. I would highly recommend this book to anyone. I've never had my heart race so much as when I read it for the first time. Anyways, Younger's description is what I always imagined bolt thrower to sound like. It sounds like being caught in open ground by an artillery barrage. As the barrage continues, we finally have a brief pause in the action. A short breather, yet the attack continues with just as much violence as before. This is some great Camo Shorts death metal riffing right here. Just wonderful. I love it. Here we get the first appearance of the vocals. Into the 8th offensive, front line reformed, artillery that never ceased, and overtures of war when cannons fade. Carl Willett's deep gnarled growl barks these lyrics out. It sounds like he is out of breath in the best way possible, like every ounce of effort from his body is required to produce these sounds. Here we begin to see the double meaning of the song come to light. Yes, this song is about the Battle of Amiens, the 100 Days Offensive, and the end of World War I, but this is also a song about bolt throwers' career, their swan song if you will. Those Once Loyal was the 8th release as a band, thus the 8th offensive, each album seeming as a different offensive, I guess you could say. The front line of the band has been reformed as Carl Willits rejoined the band before this album. Never ceasing overtures of war by artillery is a very apt description of their sound. Very nice songwriting here by the band. As we move on to the riff after the verse, it almost seems hopeful, like victory is in sight. But again, we go straight back to the battle for another set of barked words. Now the guns are silenced. End of hell storm. The final argument of kings. All earth transformed. When cannons fade. This verse here addresses the end of the First World War. The final argument of kings. This war would be the last time kings and emperors would lead their nations to war. The German, Austrian, Russian, Ottoman, and Italian monarchies would all fall directly because of the war or shortly after it. The earth was completely transformed during this war. Parts of France are still poisoned and uninhabitable because of the massive amount of shelling and the battle that happened on that ground. Here, we get the same hopeful riff, Victory is in Sight, followed by the victorious and ferocious solo. This solo to me is akin to the final battle, the 100 Days Offensive. Victorious and intense, it builds up in a marvelous crescendo, almost sounding like the final trench raid, the battle within the trenches with knives, fists, and clubs. The artillery are still pounding away relentlessly. However, the victory is bittersweet. As the solo ends, all the instruments drop out except the guitar again. This guitar is playing a somber melody, the root to the minor third to the second. The artillery ceased to fire. It was all alone, like a moment of clarity. The gravity of just how hollow a victory becomes apparent. The solo reminds me here of another passage from Storm of Steel. Younger, hot with, quote, berserker rage and, quote, overwhelming desire to kill after a shell lands and kills several of his men in grisly fashion during a battle, writes, "Then I saw my first enemy, a figure in a brown uniform, wounded apparently, crouched 20 paces away in the middle of a battered path. With his hands propped on the ground, I turned a corner and we caught sight of each other. I saw him jump as I approached and stare at me with gaping eyes, while I, with my face behind my pistol, stalked up to him slowly and coldly. A bloody scene with no witnesses was about to happen. It was a relief to me, finally, to have the foe in front of me and within reach. I set the mouth of my pistol at the man's temple. He was too frightened to move, while my other fist grabbed his tunic, feeling medals and badges of rank. An officer, he must have held some command post in these trenches. With a plaintive sound, he reached into his pocket, not to pull out a weapon, but a photograph, which he held up to me. I saw him on it, surrounded by numerous family, all standing around a terrace. It was a plea from another world. Later, I thought it was blind chance that I let him go and plunged onward. That one man often appeared in my dreams. I hope that means he got to see his homeland again." This is what this section represents to me. The transition from victorious, intense battle of the solo with the riffing and the artillery and the double kicks and the bass to the lone guitar, the sobering reality of battle, that every man is just a father, son, nephew, cousin, or uncle. This snaps Younger out of his bloodlust, just as the solo is snapped out of his victorious bloodlust as well. The artillery is ended, the war is over. To quote Bolt Thrower's song, For Victory, which is also about the First World War, "Sorrow grips at my soul. All is lost, none have won." The riff being played here is majestic, grand in statement and crushing. Just 4 simple notes. The band joins in and we can imagine one looking out over the war-torn battlefield. With broken bodies draped over the trenches, the howls of the wounded carried by the wind, the smell of burnt gunpowder, excrement and decomposing countrymen, the scurrying of rats under your feet, the grand destruction on an industrial scale. Looking out over the devastation, Carl Willits cries out, as the silence grows, steadily replacing the resonance of thunder deep in the soul. As the riff moves on to its B section, we can feel how bitter and incredulous one would be. The tremolo-picked riffs almost seem to be bursting with anger over it, especially once Carl Willits, again, barks these lyrics over top of it. Conscience still remains, horror amongst the flames, ashes keep on falling. We can view the change in music here as maybe the narrator closing his eyes amidst the carnage. You know, all the thoughts, all the PTSD, all the shell shock, all is still within his conscience. The music is tense, it's building up, the artillery is still there, it's still in his mind. But then he opens his eyes again, the riff changes back to that somber, majestic, grand riff, and he's again looking back out to the destruction in front of him. Then the next and final section goes as follows. I close my eyes, and even now the distant memory remains of the last laments to be played when cannons fade. The battle is finally over, but there is no rejoicing. It is a somber mood. As Carl barks out the last line, all the instruments end, leaving just the pulse of the drums and feedback from the guitars. This acts almost like a moment of silence, the drums acting as time, which keeps ticking, forcing the listener to contemplate what he just heard. The cannons, aka the instruments, fading out with the lives of all who were lost during the war. We will remember them, it says with its silence.
The silence was, I can only describe it as terrible. Everything dropped away from me. I thought, now what do I do now? There's no objective. There's nothing in front of us. I've just got to wait. And there was absolute silence. That was indescribable, really. When you have everything you'd been working for years suddenly disappear. No future. What is my future? What am I going to do next?
This also acts as the final goodbye from Bolt Thrower themselves, as their own cannons finally fade. The band, a few years later after this album, would state, "From day one, we made it clear that we would stop recording when we felt like we'd written the ultimate Bolt Thrower album. We just never knew when that would be. We kind of took it for granted that each release would get better and better, but we have realized now that our last release, Those Once Loyal, turned out to be that album, and basically the new stuff we've written just doesn't match up to it." All in all, 20 million war dead and 21 million wounded. The First World War is truly some of the most depressing stuff to read about. The war is still affecting us today, as I would argue our societies are still suffering from PTSD over the absolute brutality and mechanized carnage that it showcased to the world. And this song, When Cannons Fade, is a fitting tribute to both the men who served and lost their lives, but also a fitting swan song for a great death metal band. Bolt Thrower, with their punishing sound and artillery-like delivery, are one of the few bands who managed to do this war justice. A wonderful song to bow out gracefully with. Truly a great, amazing track. And that was my analysis of When Cannons Fade. What do you think? If you made it this far, give me a letter grade in the comments so I know you made it to the end. Was I correct? Was I wrong? I would love to hear your opinion. The First World War has always spoken to me, and during my undergrad degree, I wrote almost every history paper on it. But yeah, check out Storm of Steel by Ernst Junger. That's a great book. Poilu by Louis Bartas is another great memoir about it. And I would also recommend Fear by Gabriel Cavalier as another really great First World War book. Remember to like and subscribe. Most of you aren't subscribed yet. And thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate the great community response to this videos. I'm going to keep making them. I have tons and tons of ideas. You know, I'm just really passionate about a lot of songs. And instead of annoying my bandmates by texting them my little analysis of these songs, I just make videos about them instead. And people seem to enjoy hearing me ramble on about them. Anyways, thank you for watching.
Never forget it as long as I live. We went over and we crawled. If you stood up, you were dead. And I came across a Cornishman. He was ripped from his shoulder to his stomach with shrapnel. His inside was out on the ground in a pool of blood. He said, "Shoot me." Before we could draw a revolver to shoot him, he was beyond all human aid. He died. In 30 seconds he died, and he just said one word, "Mother." And that haunted me all my life.